Oh, good.
The question that I got, this is about the bond. What company or in other words, what person is looking into the bond and what company are they looking into it with?
Well, I think we have 3 companies that are going to be
Okay, I'd like
making
to,
a presentation.
okay, I would like to, and you could email me this, I'd like to know who they are and the names of the persons that's looking into it. And
Tony, yeah, absolutely.
The direction that the board provided to me last month at their board meeting to launch that work plan. That's a 2-year work plan.
Mhm.
And so we're really early in that work plan.
okay,
There are no companies identified. There's no contractors identified at this point whatsoever. At a very particular point in that work plan, we'll have to work with contract agencies, but at this point in time, there's not anyone that's been identified. Are you talking in terms of construction? Are you talking in terms of architectural?
no,
Are you
I'm talking
in
to the
terms of-
person that's going to, put the bond together for us to approve. I guess we're going to is it Merrill Lynch or is it Schwab or is it?
So the bond itself
Uh-huh.
would be an
That's what
action
I'm
of the
talking-
board, a decision of the board. The financial portion of it is determined at a much later time in the process as well. So typically our district has worked with an organization called Piper Jaffray.
Piper Jaffray.
Jaffray as the bond agent. But we've not made a determination this go around who we would work with.
Who's looking into it? What person is looking into it?
So I think at the pleasure of the board, I'd be glad to respond to more questions if you'd like, but I want to make sure that you have, an opportunity to conduct your meeting. I'd be happy to meet with Mr. Gray offline as well.
That would be better actually, because we have a huge presentation coming on about vision for the district.
Okay.
So could you make an arrangement with?
Oh, yeah,
Tony Mann?
I'd like to.
Yeah.
And the other question I have is about the online learning that you have. I would like to know who's looking into that and what programs they're looking at.
Yeah, so again, I think having that conversation offline might be really appropriate.
Yeah, no, that's great. No problem. Thank you.
You bet.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
Chair,
Any-
Chair,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We do have somebody online that would like to speak,
Oh, good.
so I can move. It looks like it's Mr. Lanahan has raised his hand.
Okay,
So I'll go ahead and move him over and we'll have him speak.
okay, sounds good.
To make any adjustments on here to be able to?
No,
hear
he
or
should
take
be
it?
able
No,
to
okay.
speak. I don't think he can
He's on
hear us. It looks like he's on mute. Yes.
Yeah,
There we go. I'm unmuted now.
right.
Good evening, board members. I wasn't able to attend in person at your last meeting, but I wanted to express gratitude and support for your guys' decision in naming the land lab after Mr. Gerke. I think that is a gracious step in the right direction. Secondly, I just wanted to encourage the board and the administration to continue to update us on the rollout of Narcan / naloxone to combat. Geez, I'm forgetting the drug name right now. Anyway, I haven't heard back from you guys yet as far as when the training is going to take place, the rollout of the Narcan, but I'm looking forward to that. That's all I got. Thank you.
It's naloxone is the medicine to counteract.
Correct.
Okay. And also, as far as naming the land lab, we have to do a resolution first so that we can go ahead and have the board members read that first, the resolution, and then pass that. It hasn't been done just yet. Just let you
Well,
know.
it's coming.
Yes, come. Yeah, I'm supposed to work with the superintendent on a resolution.
Great.
Okay,
Well, I look forward to tonight's presentation. Thank you.
all right, thank you. All right. Are there any changes to consider on the agenda? Okay, having none, going on. We're going to do the strategic planning discussion and presentation.
Mind if I get started?
Yes, go ahead and get started. This
Okay.
is Mark's baby.
Well, it's ours.
It's ours.
I have
You're
something
the
to
one that
pitch to
did the
you.
Presentation. here.
Yeah, it's, I'm looking for buy-in from my fellow board members, and I'm going to introduce Ryan in a bit, but just as a reminder, what we have talked about briefly was deciding, what is our ideal for all of our students, all of our families for a school experience in 5 or 10 years. And the idea is to have something that's led by the board, partly with the superintendent, but led by the board, to go out and start connecting with our constituents and figuring out what that is. What is our vision? What's the big audacious goal? And as a result of that, just as a reminder, Tony and I had discovered, Tony helped and found out that Estacada had used this nonprofit out of Florida, and Mr. Hess is with us tonight. And I saw some of the collateral. I had some discussions with Ryan. I included Linda and Amy in a discussion, and Ryan has something for us tonight to talk about, not only helping us define what is that big audacious goal that we want to strive for in 5 or 10 years, but also what's the governance you put in place so you can actually march towards that goal. So it's sort of two different things. One thought I was going to float by you is, when President Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon, we're going to put some people on the moon, we're going to bring them back safe by the end of the decade. That was a case where you knew what success looked like. We're going to get people there, we're going to bring them back before the end of the decade. This is a little bit different. All I know is that the world's going to be a lot different in 5 years or 10 years, but I don't know what that's going to look like. And there are sort of two different ways you can approach a project like that. In the case of the Apollo program, you have your success, you get 400,000 people and you design it and you build it and you test it and you test it and test it, and then you actually launch and go to the moon. That's called a water flow method. There's another way, if you have sort of bigger, less specific goals, there's another way of doing things it's called an agile method, or you do it in sprints where you focus on what can we achieve, what gives us the most value now, and you do it in bite-sized chunks, and then you reevaluate along the way. And I think that Ryan's going to touch on those two different methods, contrast waterfall versus agile. One thing about the Moon program to me is a bit remarkable is that it passed through 3 presidential administrations in 2 different parties. So it was President Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, which to me is right for any of those presidents could have said, no, we're changing what success looks like. And we're not going to, I think it's a testament to the fact that Kennedy had such a strong vision that they stuck with it through those administrations. When we sit down and start thinking about our big goals 5 or 10 years from now, we're going to have different boards. And to me, that's just something I've been thinking about is what I don't want to get something started and then have it shelved and have something completely different put in place 2 or 3 years from now. So those were just some comments I had to kind of introduce Mr. Hess. Tony, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
I think your introduction was perfect.
Okay. So Mr. Hess, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today and the conversations that we've had in advance. And want to first just do a check. I know we want to have some presentation and discussion. Would it be okay if I try to integrate the two and do it together as opposed to presentation first and discussion, or would you rather the other way?
Give the presentation. Give the presentation first.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. So thanks again for having me. I'm Ryan Hess. I've been with Huron Studer Education for about 9 years now. Before this, I worked in 2 different school districts and was a classroom teacher, had different school and district leadership-based roles over time. One thing I haven't been able to do yet is be a board member in our local community, and would like to do that one day. Have a lot of respect for you all and your leadership and the service that you provide in that regard. So thank you for doing that. I know it makes a great difference in the lives of those that you serve. And so we'll share some information today, and appreciate, like I said, the learning opportunities that I've had about your district so far to build into that, and looking forward to learning more from the conversations with you today as well. So by way of kind of organizational introduction, we currently work with about 130 different school districts and some higher ed institutions across the country in a variety of ways, a number in Oregon as well, and are really focused on continuous improvement, district-wide, system-wide continuous improvement, and leveraging that as a strategy to help move organizations from good to great and really advance strong outcomes for kids in the communities that you serve. A little sampling of some of our partners in Oregon, Clackamas ESD, Estacada, number of others that you see there as well, and also have some thought leadership that has come from the work also. So our partners have contributed to what you see there on the right in terms of a recent book on improvement science, some articles that have been featured in Edutopia and AASA School Administrator magazine. So good outcomes coming from the work. By way of a little bit more just of what we do in big picture as an organization, work everywhere, really kind of across the spectrum of what you see represented in this continuum. We actually certify teachers, have a teacher certification program that you see there on the left. So we work with teachers in particular ways to certify and around continuous improvement, and then also with leaders and boards and the system level approaches that you see more on the right. Everything from stakeholder surveys and strategic planning and what we refer to as this organizational excellence model. Very specifically, what I'll talk with you about is really kind of an integration of the three areas that you see on the right there. We serve a number of school districts in Oregon and in other states in this way as well, and always adapted very specifically to what's most significant for you all and how we design the work and model together. There's a couple of frameworks that underpin this work. One are these 9 principles for organizational excellence. After the presentation, may want to come back to this slide just to get your thoughts and feedback as part of this discussion. I often like to ask, as you're reflecting on your work in the district, what comes out in terms of points of pride, maybe as you reflect on some of the principles of the good work that's occurred, and then also as you're looking to continue to advance the work in the district, anything that may be of particular significance to you, and it just helps me, to learn more and to build that discussion in that way. Very specifically around strategic planning, which would be integrated in the model that we've talked about so far, and as I understand, would be something that you'd likely want to do very early on in the process. At a high level, we really look at first, really level setting on understanding what's most significant, where you've been, what your priorities have been, what's worked well in the district, understanding the backdrop in terms of student outcomes and data, engaging with people around visioning, and then a little bit different approach that you were alluding to earlier in terms of a future back approach to this work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that detail with regard to strategic planning. So what we found with, lots of ways to do strategic planning, and this model is very similar. It's just a little nuanced. And part of what we've seen, and I know you've experienced it as well, is that the expectations of those we've served has changed pretty rapidly over the last few years, and we think it'll continue to change. And as Technology has advanced, and the ways that we want to make sure that we're designing our education systems and schools for the future. We want to have that future eye. And then really, want to have the opportunity to be bold in our thinking of what's going to create the best outcomes, not just now for those we serve, but 5-10 years down the road. And so just a little bit here of some differences from traditional strategic planning and this approach. In a traditional strategic plan model, and we do this too, we anchor on the here and now, and then we kind of think about what would it take, what kind of incremental improvement can we make over the next maybe 3 to 5 years. In this way, we still do that, but then we say, let's kind of unleash ourselves from the current a little bit and just vision, if we were starting from the beginning and didn't have any constraints and could design the kind of schools and district and educational experience, really the experience for our students and communities, what would that look like? Let's be creative and think about that. What would that look like, and what do we think the future will demand of us in a particular way? And so really engaging around that vision, and then thinking backwards from, okay, if we want to move forward in that particular way of aspiration, then rather than thinking about incremental improvement year over year, how can we backwards plan to really make some of those bold things a reality? So just a little bit of a contrast, and I've mentioned a little bit of this now, but that traditional method, like I mentioned, really at current state, and how can we incrementally improve? As we just take a little bit of a twist to that, so staying true to what works well, but really saying, what would an ideal be, and how will we know if we're successful? Staying true to our core vision and purpose, but how can we really continue to advance in particular ways to where we have the external environment is a particular way now, but it's changing rapidly, and so let's acknowledge that, but also acknowledge and plan for the future. And then also really try to think a little futuristically around not just what people expect of us now, but what might some of those expectations be 10 years out, and the way that people want to engage in school, learn, and then the workforce as well. We've seen a lot of different trends in terms of workforce expectations and engagement, and so how can we bring parity to some of those things years down the road? And then, like I mentioned, lastly, as we look to achieve the ideal future, then what are the things that we put in place today and year over year to really build into that? One of the things that we've learned is that leadership is really fundamental to our ability to advance our organizations. And when we think about leaders, we think about board members as leaders in your governance role. We think about superintendent, formal leaders, and we also think about really wanting to build that sense of everyone's a leader in terms of ownership in particular ways. And so as we advance this work, we really think about a blend between as leaders how we can make outsized impact both on culture and engagement and the environment that's significant to those that we serve and work with. And then also, as we develop the strategic plan together, the role that leaders have in that implementation process. This evidence-based leadership framework is sometimes we also refer to it as an implementation or execution framework, and is really what we look to say, as together we define those goals that are most important now and into the future, how do we then take that multi-year strategic plan and annualize that, build clarity in a measurable way around what success looks like, develop leaders to develop people as an integrated part of it. And then on the right side, I always kind of confess this way, and it wasn't intentional. It was just when I think earlier in my career and maybe the ways that we operated and didn't have a framework like this idea of accelerators or initiatives, I think we sometimes had on the left side of the framework. A lot of our goals, instead of really being clear about what success would look like, They were really more action steps or initiatives. And so we're going to implement this and do these things. And a strategic plan in a particular time years ago for us might have been a checklist of a lot of actions we were going to do. That then when we looked back, we could say, okay, well, did we do all of those things? Well, what did we achieve? And that what did we achieve as a result of all of those actions was a little bit harder for us to answer. And so we really just flipped that a little bit to say, let's be clear around what success looks like, develop and invest in our people to help achieve those results, and then really prioritize, kind of bluntly, as few new things, so to speak, at a given time as possible, but deeply and well, and then build on those things to get out of what sometimes in education can feel like a little bit of an initiative overload in particular ways. With the strategic planning process, we customize all of the work we do, but this I think will look very familiar to you all. Some common components of strategic plans, and these can be rebranded in terms of the language in particular ways. We always engage with you to understand what's already in place. Are there things that you want to keep and maintain, or get feedback on to maybe tweak or redevelop anew? For example, mission, vision, core values and beliefs. I know some of those components are in place. And so redevelopment of that can be part of the process. A check on that can be part of the process, or keeping core things in place. And we would get that direction from you as then we build the goals and strategies connected to that work and the sense of alignment across all of those things. I think one of the things that's a little bit different or unique about us as an organization is we do strategic planning just as a standalone engagement at times. Though, as I mentioned, a little over 130 or so organizations that we work with across the country, probably about 95% of those we're engaging with similarly to the Oregon partners I mentioned earlier, with Estacada being one of those examples, not just in the planning process, but in that implementation process over time. So I think we bring a little bit different lens to the work because we're not a group that just does strategic planning and leaves. Most of the time we're engaging with people in the implementation of that. So the way we develop plans to make sure that they're both aspirational, but also actionable, I think is a particular lens that we bring to that work. I'm just going to quickly share some artifacts, examples of some elements of strategic plans. So not full necessary plans, but plans on a page or representations of that, just to give you a little bit of a feel. This is Meade County Schools. This is a Kentucky school district. This is a component, kind of their plan on a page, summary element of that. You also see, as I was talking some about that implementation process, we're a partner to them in that implementation work as well. I'll share a little bit more details around the structures that you see here, but this is that annualization and that agile implementation and continuous improvement process and work at a system level that you see in the way that this district has represented it. This is a South Dakota school district that's a component of theirs, that plan on a page type representation. I mentioned the core values as well. And so this is part of our work with the different districts, Shelby County Schools, where not the full plan as the example here, but just to illustrate the identification and the definition of those core values as a key part of that well-rounded strategic plan and process. We also do this work in higher education. This is an example of the University of West Georgia. They took a really innovative approach to their strategic planning process, as you all are considering as well. And so you'll see that represented in the priority areas and their strategic priorities as just to be honest, and I'm not saying anything that they haven't said, it's part of their dialogue. Higher education has gone through some challenging times. And they're wanting to make sure that they're relevant now and continuing to be highly relevant and meeting the needs of their students and communities in the future. And so that was a large part of the process with the University of West Georgia. We've been working with them for, I think, 7, maybe longer years now. And as higher ed in general has had some challenges and declines in enrollment, and some downward trends in particular ways. In the University of Georgia system, this has been one of the institutions that's been going up in those measures that you want to go, as others have been going down. So for those of you with higher ed, kind of connections as well, I think you know how challenging this time has been. What you see on the right here is a little bit, it's a neat exercise as we're moving into implementation. It's a little bit of that visioning and strategic bullseye of saying, staying true to our core of what's most important. And then as we innovate particular things and ways of doing things in the future, new ideas that we want to test out, how do we begin to test them, see what works well? And as certain things are making outsized impact, begin to grow those things programmatically to more effectively meet the needs of those that we serve as we lean into some future forward ways. Lastly, just in terms of examples of artifacts or components, this is Point Park University. They're in Pittsburgh. We're in the strategic planning process now with them. It's not completed. And so what you see here is this is a portion of their public-facing webpage. We don't design web pages, so to be clear with that, but we're a partner with them in the communication and engagement process with the community. And so you just see, a little bit of how we're working together to make sure as the process is moving forward, the people are well engaged, know what's going on, and have those opportunities. So, I talked mostly about strategic planning, a little bit of a different lens to that, and touched on a little bit of this integrated approach. If okay, I do have more that I can share and would like to, but I know that's been a lot of information. So I'd love to kind of pause and have some questions or dialogue if anything's top of mind for any of you all.
Well, I had a question about helping parents to help their students more with their homework and teachers getting more in touch with parents and discussing their homework needs or the child's understanding of what he's had for lessons that day from each teacher. How are we helping them to reach their goals, to get their lessons planned, to understand what is being taught in the class? I mean, is this what we're doing here? To help?
I appreciate.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate you surfacing that because, there's ways as schools and districts that we've provided that kind of support in the past, and that need I think is still there and probably greater than ever.
Yeah.
And so as we think about how we meet that need and innovate, and when I say innovate, I'm just really, in some ways thinking just try new things and do things a little bit differently based on the needs that are there in the community. And so that's absolutely, part of the purpose and discussion. What are the needs that students and families have, and how can we think differently about meeting those? So not to solve that, that'll be part of our dialogue together, but just to maybe give an example for thought that is very directly related to it. As an organization, the pandemic was challenging, but we sure learned some new things. And I'll be very specific about what I mean with one of those examples. And strategic planning is probably a good example of it. Before the pandemic, whenever we facilitated strategic planning processes, aside from maybe coordination calls and planning calls, all of the work was on site, which worked fine. We didn't have any complaints about that. Didn't have any reason to think differently about it at the time. During the pandemic, we continued to have districts that we serve where strategic planning was a priority, but convening people physically wasn't possible at that time. And so we actually, for the first time, pushed ourselves and did entire strategic planning processes virtually. I say that as an example because I know you did the same thing with instruction and providing that instruction to students. And so the next thing I would say, just as an example there, is what we learned in pushing ourselves in that way. Now when we're able to work more in person as well, we actually learned that a blend of some virtual and some on site actually helps us reach more people. So for example, we used to just focus groups, they used to be all in person. Now, even though they can all still be in person, we tend to do a blend and offer some virtual ones too, because there are community members who maybe their schedules wouldn't allow or transportation wouldn't allow, or maybe they just weren't comfortable coming up to the school or a district location to provide that engagement and input. I say that because to go back to your specific question, I think this is just me thinking out loud. I think that as we've gone back to teaching students in person, which is really important, we also learned that teachers can help them virtually, right? And so there may be opportunities of strategies to consider where if students need additional support or tutoring, or parents need that support as well. Just in my history in the past, we'd have been like, okay, how do we arrange transportation? How do we get them up there to the school? And there were all these barriers to that. We can offer those kinds of things virtually after school now, for example. And so, again, not to try to solve exactly what you asked about, because we'll build that community conversation, but that's a great example of how we really want to facilitate that discussion that you raised of needs that people have, and how can we think differently about some ways to address those. Is that helpful?
Yeah, somewhat. Go ahead.
Do I need to unmute to be able to be heard by him, or am I just cool with talking?
You gotta talk.
I can.
Yeah.
Microphone.
Yeah.
Check. Ryan, I just had a quick question. Do you have more of your presentation to go? Because if so, I can wait. I've got a couple questions I wanted to ask, but I'd rather hear the rest of your presentation first if I can, or I'll just ask.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm happy to continue.
Yeah.
So, as we think about, the implementation component as well, and this is an example. So as we engage with leaders, both around, we have clarity around vision, and what we don't want to do is we want to have a great strategic plan, but what we don't want to do is just a beautiful strategic plan that, adorns our walls, but doesn't really walk the halls in particular ways, that doesn't realize action. And so there's some continuous improvement tools and structures that we use to really execute and implement the plan. This is an example, a district scorecard or a strategic scorecard. Yours would be anchored in the priority areas that you define. So I just took another district as an example. They identified, this was a California school district, and their strategic plan, they had these 4 priority areas. And so the scorecard then is, if this is success visionary over in their case, a 5-year term, because that was the time frame that they wanted to set for the actual formal plan, then what does success look like in year 1? Aligned to those priority areas that you would identify. And really three kind of components to it underneath each of those pillar or priority areas. One, at the district level, a small number of roll-up annual measurable goals that help us know, are we on track to actually achieving in tangible ways based on what we identified as most significant in the process. This next component is this progress monitoring, those lead measures. Just like with teachers, we want them to know how students are doing before the test, before the end of the year. So if something's not working well for that student, they can make changes to further education rather than just the test being punitive. Same thing at the system level. So these goals are annual, but if we wait till the end of the year to know how we're doing, we've lost a lot of time. So what are those lead measures that help us know if we're on track throughout the year? That really guides this last component, which is that strategic actions, or sometimes people refer to a 20-80 rule. What are the 20% of actions that we think strategically, if we implement well, will help us get 80% of the outcomes? And so that's that scorecard component. We find that for boards, this is really helpful as well. Sometimes board members are asking, as you're approving different budget expenditures related to instruction and improving outcomes from kids, sometimes board members, I think, will rightly ask, are we getting an ROI or a return on investment? Are the funds and the resources making the impact? And this helps to naturally answer that question, because we're starting with what will measurable success look like? And then we're making decisions about things that we're going to implement or do, or if there are resources and funds needed for that based on that. And so as we're implementing, we're naturally better positioned to answer, is it working? Because we started with the why of why we were making that decision, as opposed to when I talked about that framework earlier, starting with the initiatives and then doing all those things and wondering, is it making a difference or not? And having sometimes trouble, just not speaking for you all, but for my past, of being able to answer that question in the way that we wanted to. So as this process cascades over time of that strategic scorecard, aligned to your strategic plan, each year at the district level, and developing that updated scorecard every year, which goes to the agility of what we talked about earlier, as opposed to thinking at this point in time we can map out 5 years, but doing the learning as we're going as part of the process, and then working also with school and department level leaders of. In the case of schools, based on our student data, what does success look like for us, based on what those individual needs are, and also as departments, how we connect and contribute. And really the goal is, as you see on the right, really moving that strategic plan to action and working with leaders on that implementation process, and being supportive of that in a very defined way. And trying to manage, sometimes, like I mentioned in education, we would feel like we've got 50 things going on. How in the world can we do one more thing? So making sure we're being strategic about doing the right things, which helps us make greater impact, also helps us realize, frankly, cost savings, and engagement savings too. Because sometimes I think as educators, we can feel a little overwhelmed by all of the things that are going on, and what's making the most impact, and how is it all connected. We found that work around culture alongside this is really significant to do. And so as we're working with leaders around that continuous improvement and action planning and implementation process that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and also around what are core things that we can do as we're continuing to get input from our employees, parents, students, community stakeholders, to continue to build a good, strong culture. And we don't focus on culture because we have a bad one. We focus on it because we want to have an excellent one. And also because we know as we continue to do new things to advance the work for the right reasons for kids to get new outcomes, sometimes as leaders we'll be managing change in the organization. And so the attentiveness to culture is really significant. We also have surveys that many of our partners use. Estakate is a great example of leveraging these. In fact, they just presented on some of these surveys at COSA a few weeks ago. An employee engagement, parent, student, and district services survey. And so this is during the strategic planning process to get input, but it's also annually. So we're constantly connected to that input and feedback from the community, and then working as leaders to say, how do we communicate back to people to make sure we're understanding the input, to take a few things to action for continued improvement. And that integrates into that scorecard process as well, so it's not isolated. Then taking those 1 or 2 action steps at a time based on the feedback that's going to really continue to advance the overall culture and organization. So on this journey to good to great, we've found that we can focus on strategy, which is really important. We can focus on culture, which is really important. Though if we just focus on strategy and not on culture, culture takes a hit. Because we're introducing new things into the organization, and really honestly, even as we're introducing those new things, as people are going through that learning curve, we'll feel it a little bit in the organization, not in a scary way or overly negative way, but a way to be attentive to know that as leaders, we want to continue to get input and maintain the connection to people. And this too, because during COVID, emotions were high, everything was very difficult. So the skill set of and what we would do as leaders to manage that was very different than what we had to do before. So it's building that leadership and systems capacity to be able to continue to manage those things. So all of what we've talked about, none of it is an initiative in and of itself, but really as you take the things that you've identified, like on the left, just some general examples of language that are important, you have in place that you're looking to advance, really moving those to action. You see some more action and verb type language on the right, and doing so in an integrated way. So the strategic plan doesn't feel like an initiative, and surveying people doesn't feel like an initiative, but disconnected. So we're really moving the overall organization together in a cohesive way. I mentioned a little bit earlier, just to provide a little visibility, and we've shared this and can follow up as well. A number of our partners have been featured nationally in the New York Times, for example. Ed Week have been spotlighted by the Carnegie Foundation for the advancement of teaching and learning. That's actually where I met Superintendent Ryan Carpenter in Estacada several years ago, actually. And then a number of our partners have been featured in AASA School Administrator Magazine, which is the National Superintendent Association. So this was a 2021 edition focused on district-wide organizational excellence, and in 2019 focused on district-wide continuous improvement as a couple of examples there. We also have events that we do to build that network and to bring people to. We'll have one in Estacada in March of this upcoming year. They've received tremendous amount of recognition for incredible work that they've advanced quite quickly, and like to build those networks with those that we serve and work with, and elevate the good work that you're doing. And at the end of the day, we're really valuing people and putting people first, being very connected to a sense of service and those that we serve through the schools and the district. Also recognizing, like I said, that a great, beautiful strategic plan is wonderful, though we like to say really our strategy is what we're doing. And so that's why that implementation component is so significant, because the results really truly matter for those that we serve and build the educational and learning opportunities that we want to make sure we're creating as really best in class. So would love to stop there. Happy to take questions that you have, and if there's any visuals that I can reshare to answer any questions, I'll be happy to do that as well, but just want to have good conversation and discussion with you all.
Craig, you had some questions.
Somebody else wants to go first.
Go ahead.
I'm open. So Ryan, thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation. I think one of the most important questions for me, Mark, you kind of introduced this as sort of a thing that's kind of like that athletic visioning process that the district went through. And I wasn't part of that team. I mean, I was on the board at the time, but for part of it anyway. But I wasn't as part of the strategic visioning. So I don't know how this would look like that. And what I do want to say, Ryan, this is not meant to be overly critical. I apologize if it sounds that way, but in your presentation, I saw a lot of really cool graphics, but also a lot of what seemed to me kind of generalities.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you could maybe give us a little bit more specifics about what you're talking about doing for this district. And I say that specifically, and unless that wasn't the, point of this. I mean, I know you can't dig down into the weeds. That's not what I'm asking for, but
Sure.
basically what I'm hearing is a strategic planning process.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little more detail?
Sure. So very specifically with the strategic planning process, so starting with that, typically, we'll build the alignment to things like your timeline and time frame and whatnot. But we typically, recommend, maybe like a 5 to 7 or so month period of time to make sure that there's, good opportunity for engagement with community stakeholders. And I'm actually going to bring up just to maybe illustrate an example. If this is the kind of thing that as a next step, if helpful to do, that we would customize for you all, but and something that I shared out earlier as well. So let me bring this document up. So for the strategic planning process, a sample time frame that you see there below, and I'm really kind of focusing on this center part here, and then you see that overlaid over an example timeline is what you're seeing. And so one of the first things that we do, like I mentioned, is engage with you all as a board and leadership team to understand what are the current components that are in place that's part of what you want to redefine or update as part of the process, like mission, vision, those kinds of things. We develop a work plan and a timeline. So rather than it being this example, it's very specific with you. Form a strategic planning advisory committee that is that group that has the ability to meet multiple times throughout the process. So as we're getting input from stakeholders, we're coming back, we're taking the lift of analyzing that, going through that data, coming back to that steering committee to present that information and develop the components of the strategic plan as we're going throughout that process. So the strategic planning committee is a really significant part of the work. I mentioned a little bit of that survey process. So often we'll administer an employee, parent, student survey early on in the process to get that baseline input and perception, and then also facilitate focus groups as well. And so that combination of, what people sometimes refer to as the quantitative and qualitative data is a really significant element. And we take the lift of all of those things to get the input. And then again, come back to the steering committee. Here's the input. How do we begin to shape those different strategic plan components? As we get to draft components of the plan, another thing that we found to be really helpful and to make sure that the community has good chance for input and involvement is to then put those draft components of the strategic plan, mission, vision, values, goals, high-level strategies, components like that, into a custom online feedback survey to really go back to the community and say, thank you for all of you who responded earlier or engaged in a focus group or town hall to provide input. Based on your input, here are the components of the draft strategic plan that we've put together. Before we finalize this, we want to hear from you again. Are we getting it right? Give us feedback on that. We take the lift of analyzing and going through all of that data and that work as part of that process, come back to the committee. If there are changes that the committee would make based on that feedback or that stakeholders were recommending, update that, and then bring that to the board very specifically. So that's a part of the work that I was talking about, and a little bit of detail around, just the strategic planning process as one of those elements. So other things that I'll talk about in addition to strategic planning, but I know that's a really critical piece. So I want to pause there. And does that help, or does that raise more thoughts or questions specifically about that?
One thing I'll ask, going back to Mark again, you were talking about strategic planning around what the student experience would be like going forward into the years, right? We've already done a facilities plan. We've already done a plan for athletics. What would the student experience look like in a more, I don't know if I'm going to say general sense, but I got the impression you were talking about what the experience look like apart from facilities and athletics. Is that kind of what?
I was thinking, how will we use technology in the future? We've got lots of opinions in the community that I'd like to know. What is our view of being able to use in-classroom instruction versus blended versus virtual versus accessing instructors from around the world? Mostly it would be around having a pretty robust process around engaging the community about what is the school that they want for the students and families in the district.
So I guess my question is, maybe this is a twofold question. Maybe, I don't know if it's to him or really to you or other people. To what extent is this a strategic planning process around facilities or around athletics? I mean, is that part of this?
I see this being all encompassing, much bigger than facilities.
So
and
not
athletics.
just a plan for facilities,
No,
not just a plan for athletics, but
No.
looking at other things,
looking, yes,
IT, academics, help me out here, I want to put agriculture,
ag,
yeah,
the kind of food we serve. I mean,
okay.
there's a lot of community members are looking at the schools now. Some of it's critical. So I started thinking, well, let's go find out what they want.
And then-
So much broader than just facilities.
So when you say, and I don't know if this is a question for Ryan or a question for the group, what kind of a timeline are we looking at for the strategic plan? Are we talking about a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, maybe all 3 of those?
I would actually ask Ryan. The first bite I was thinking of is spending 4 or 5 months going through the process that Ryan just outlined. And then making a decision about, this could be several multi-year type of engagement with Huron.
Well, what I meant, I guess, was not so much the period of time over which we were engaged with the planner, but how long of a time horizon would the plan itself have?
I don't know how to answer. That's a great question. I don't
Okay.
know.
So Ryan.
And
can
I
you
can
answer that?
provide, sure, absolutely. I can provide recommendations. Typically a 3 or 5 year plan is what most people are looking to. That doesn't mean in the process that you're not thinking further out than that, but the actual plan is really for that span of time. We don't recommend, a formal strategic plan. We would do it, but if you ask our opinion and recommendation would be, not over 5 years. And part of that is because, a lot happens in 3 years, a lot happens in 5 years. And so, looking too far out, can sometimes almost in retrospect seem, maybe later on a little presumptuous, in that way that we, cast that horizon a little further than what was really reasonable to do. But 3 to 5 years, I mean, we've had people who do 3, 4, or 5, and I don't think there's a magic answer to one of those, but I do think in that range, it makes most sense from our experience.
Okay, that's great. The last question I have, and I don't know if you can answer this or if anybody can or anybody has the guts to, but you've worked, it sounds like you guys have worked for a lot of different organizations of varying sizes. And since I'm not familiar with your firm, I have to wonder, with the current atmosphere in the education profession today, to what extent does your company or the process kind of bring politics into the planning?
We don't, and we really recommend. What we found is talking to the heart of what people want for, if I'm a parent in your district, my children, the children in our community, and really just using language that's very not jargon, avoiding jargon and educational ease as well, right? But really from my lens, and I am a parent. I've got 2 boys, one in middle school and one in high school, and lots of things that opinion of what's important, for them and for their education and extracurriculars and all of those things. Those are the conversations we facilitate. Those are the conversations that we have. And we've been doing this for a long time, and we've been doing it a lot recently. And I'll tell you something that's different right now. And it's, I think it's positive, and I'll just, share just an example, this is actually North Clackamas as we completed their plan. This is a little bit of a breakdown of the feedback that they received by stakeholder group, if that makes sense. Tremendous, and I know they're a larger district, but we're finding that more people than ever are wanting to be engaged in these kinds of conversations. And that when we're not providing that space and facilitating that, the so-called politics or those divides are worse than when we're bringing people together to have the conversations around what's most important, as a community around learning in the future for the kids that we serve.
You guys have some experience with, or have you had meetings with the community and other, I don't know, organizations, people, whatever, kind of go south and get contentious and be able to kind of bring things back around to sanity, if that makes sense?
We have, that happens, right? I mean, anytime you're engaging with people, people are passionate, and so yes, absolutely, and so again, we really try to avoid charged words or language or catchphrases or whatnot, and just really speak to the heart of what's most important that we're all trying to achieve together, and we find that as we do that, it's not controversial. I mean, not to say that things don't occur when people engage and have different opinions on different things, but this is not traditionally controversial work. And we're really looking to better. I mean, we find people appreciate it when a board and superintendent and leaders like you all come to the community and say, we want to hear from you. We want to make this school district great. We want our schools to be places where students want to come to learn and parents want to send their kids and employees love to come to work each day. That people appreciate our sense of heart and purpose for wanting to make that occur. Again, not to say that things don't occur, and we do have expertise with that, but it's usually it's fun work. It's really good work.
Well, thank you. You answered all my questions. I appreciate it.
Are there any? Yeah, Amy?
I heard you mention a meeting in SDK. Did you say that was open to the public? I think you said it was in March.
We were. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes, it is. Yes. So we hold conferences several times a year. We've done a lot of things with SDK recently, so I apologize. My mind was, we were with them at COSA, a few weeks ago, so it took me a second. We have conferences several times a year, and this one will be, and we'd love to have you all there. I think we might have already shared a little bit of information with you, Tony and Mark, but we'll make sure that we do. I don't have the date right in front of me, and I don't want to say the wrong date, but it's in March, and we'll get that to you. And it is, and we want to have lots of folks from Oregon there and be part of that learning and shared network together. So absolutely.
Okay.
In Clackamas ESD, we work with 4 districts there, I believe, plus the actual ESD. So just really good growing work, and you're part of the state and beyond as well.
Okay. And then I heard you mention surveys in the strategic planning stage. Will there be other surveys that are sent out and reviewed, past that point to measure the success? And if so, would it be in the implementation stage, so we still have time to pivot, our action items and whatnot?
Absolutely. So the surveys, doing the surveys, initially, and doing the strategic planning phase is really helpful for a couple of reasons. One, it's a way that many people can provide input in the community. If I can't come to a focus group or I can't engage in another way, and we want that input and feedback. And it also gives us baseline perception data. So then to your question, as we're moving into implementation, it's just like student data. We've got that baseline and we want to continue to improve it. And so we come back to that. And then that scorecard process that I mentioned, that's part of that implementation framework, the survey feedback, just like student achievement data, that will be part of that. That's integrated into that process. So not only will we, annually go back and get that input and then track that, over time, that's also how we really formally action plan alongside with student. And that data is important too, and it's valued, is what I'm trying to say. And then we're also working with leaders and providing good professional development around, based on this feedback, what are things that we can do that continue to, advance the school, advance the department in particular ways, that's responsive to the community.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, anyone else? Yeah, I guess
Right.
we're all good.
Would as a next step be a potential proposal for us, or what would you recommend for us as a next step?
Sure.
I know you gave us kind of a broad brush what annual cost might be, but where do we go from here if we move forward?
Absolutely. So I can put that together if helpful to do as a next step. Just from the input that you've given me today and the conversations we've had before, I think I've, gotten a sense of alignment of what your expectations are there and those broad priority areas. So I'm happy to do that. And I can anchor to your time frame too. So if that's something that would then come back to the board for formal vote and approval, and you want it at a particular meeting, you don't have to tell me now, but if you give me that date, I'll make sure to align to that date, if that makes sense too.
It does.
So would this would be,
Oh, I was just gonna ask, does he have our mission and goals already?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I don't believe we shared mission and goals.
We've not shared any material directly at this point. We did meet, if I may,
Yeah,
we did meet in that first conversation and give just some baseline narrative of who we are, how we know where we are on this journey. Talked about graduation rates, talked about community perception, talked about strategies we've used to date. So I think Ryan has a sense of who our community is through that conversation, through this conversation. But documents, we've not moved documents on to Ryan at this point. I think some of our work has touched in these areas, but when I hear Ryan talking about moving from good to great, we've done a good job on strategic planning. I think we've got opportunities to continue to improve, whether that's with student education and the Huron group, or however, we have room to continue to improve. And if I may, while I'm speaking, Chair Eskridge, I think one of the things that really called to me in this, I heard from Superintendent Carpenter in Estacada. I'm all about healthy competition. We're better than Estacada, I know that. We're playing them against, in volleyball tonight, right? I know that. But I'm also smart enough, I think, to know when other people are on to something that is good, and we'll learn from other people. What I heard Ryan Carpenter say in Estacada is that the process that they went through, I've not tested this in the Estacada community, I've not talked with school boards, but I've gotten indicators that what I've heard him say is right on the money, that the community felt heard. And as much as I'd like to believe that we've done a strong job of communicating with our community, I think during the pandemic, we got high marks in our surveys of the community around the communication that they received. And yet last spring, you heard in your board meetings, and I heard in your board meetings, community members saying we've done a poor job of communicating and listening to the community. I think we're at a moment in time, not just in Molalla, but across the country, where we've got to dig deeper and make sure we've heard everybody, because those who felt unheard and disengaged were the ones that were in your board meeting last March. Hundreds of people. We've got nobody here tonight. I think generally because the community, this is me speaking, generally, I think our community has great confidence in what's happening in their schools. Generally, I believe that. I was the middle school back to school night a couple nights ago. The smiles and the parents and I think that great things are happening in our school district, but there's a portion of our community that does not feel heard or engaged or believed. And whatever we can do to dig deeper and really hear from everybody as the board shapes a vision, that would be my hope, because I don't want to be in a space ever again where you've got hundreds of people marching on your board meeting telling you that they don't feel heard by the school district. This is an opportunity to go from good to great when it comes to hearing from your stakeholders, because Studer has proven that they can do that in communities like ours, in Estacada, in Redmond. I think the other piece that I would say here is, the measurable evidence I saw on one of your slides, Ryan, the trials and tribulations of higher education right now, enrollment is just on the plummet. The projection that community colleges may be a thing of the past is a real concern that's out there. And when I'm hearing Ryan say that he's worked with a university in Georgia, and as a result of this process, they actually have seen their enrollment increasing, that for me is a tangible, the work that they went into engage that strategic. So I feel like I'm preaching at this point. I want you to know, as your superintendent, I support wherever the board goes on strategic planning. I know that when the curiosity, the interest was expressed by this board, by Mark, I knew that, Huron might be a first great group to speak with. They have contracts with other districts in our state. We could piggyback on those contracts. We would not have to go through an RFP process, as I'm understanding our selection process. So that could be, or we could go through an RFP process, and bring in other groups to have a similar conversation with the board. So I feel like I've rambled long enough. Thanks for indulging me for a second.
Linda,
Yeah.
if I might just, real quick, I just wanted more of a question to the rest of you folks. And I wanted to make sure Ryan heard it, because it sounds like he's going off perhaps to write a proposal. And my question to you is, how do you feel about what he should be looking at in terms of a strategic vision and direction? And what I mean is sort of subject areas. Again, we've looked at athletics and we've looked at facilities, and if we want to look at those again, as far as I'm concerned, that's fine. But are there some, Mark mentioned IT, are there some other things you'd like him or us to look at besides facilities, athletics, IT?
Well, my biggest concern, and I've been reading about it, is we've got a lot of kids that are going into college and they have to do a lot of remedial courses because high school has not really truly prepared them for college. And this is where I think we need to improve. This is kind of my concern about this strategic planning that you're talking about. I want to see how can we get there, make sure that our students are not taking remedial courses in college, that they can start on day one on a college course without having to remediate. And another thing is apparently the 2 years that they were doing their virtual learning, they've lost a lot of education. We are plummeting in our education levels. So how are we going to improve that? And then another thing is our local control. People were real upset about that because they're telling us to wear masks, and the parents were fed up with it. And I'd like to be able to guarantee to patients that, to the moms and dads that we're going to have a little more local control. So those are some of my goals that we'd like to improve for our parents, our constituents, our students. Go ahead, Neil.
Well, I think it kind of goes beyond those real specific things.
Yes.
As we talk about that relationship with the community, just like, identifying with, whether it be in business and industry, for somebody outside to really understand who we are as a company or as a education organization, unless we can demonstrate a strategic vision and what those achievement plans are to get there, they'll never know what we're doing here, and they'll never have confidence in what we're doing. I think they have some confidence, Tony, because we've not been horribly performing, but they still don't know where we're going. They really don't know, what that concept of prepared, which is really what we're doing here, is preparing, our youth and our students, whether it be for college or whatever their future brings. It is so important that the community knows what those actionable items, those individual missions are that gets them to prepared. And so I'm pretty passionate about this kind of process. It's been difficult for me for the past 10 years of how we get, beyond. It's easy to attack things in projects like sports. What's that sports vision for Malala? What's that facilities plan? But this real education model around prepared is a little more challenging, and I'm glad a company is out there that's really taken on the issue of tackling this. I'd be really excited to do it. I have no visions of success of the process because I've not been involved in their process, but it sounds to me like it's something we should pursue. I made a note on my paper that education without a strategic vision and achievement plan for that vision is dangerous. And yet that's been the path we've been on for the past, whatever, 100 years. And it's derailed, and that vision becomes whatever political entity, if we want to throw politics into this, that wants to steer it. Because if you don't have a vision and a roadmap, somebody else will give you one. And, it's real easy to be diverted. And so the more we can do this work with our community, the better this district's going to be. So.
Well said.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, we're good.
Anything else?
Is there anything else?
Ryan?
Okay, no,
All right,
right.
thank you so much.
Thank
I
you
know it's
very
late. It's for you. Appreciate you spending time with
Yeah.
us.
I appreciate all of you. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you and the conversation today. Beyond that, though, thank you for your leadership and what you're doing in the district. Like I mentioned, have always worked in public education or in service to in one way or another, and have my boys there. And the community where we live is a great one, though there's a lot of disparities as well. And a strong educational system is really the backbone of a thriving community. And the work you do in leadership and service to your community is so important. It's always been hard. I don't know that in my lifetime, it hasn't been harder than it had the last couple of years. Is the hardest I've ever seen. And so my respect for you and what you do is tremendous. And I know that it makes great impact for the students and families and communities you serve. So it's been an honor to have the time with you today. And beyond that, I really appreciate what you do in service to your communities and stakeholders.
thank
All
you.
right, thank you, Ryan.
All
Thank you.
right. So we need an action item. It's the 2022-23 calendar revision, and I'm gonna let Tony explain why we need this revision.
Perfect. And it may be just as we're being nimble, it may not be that there's a need for a revision. So I appreciate you giving me some space tonight to just give a little context. We're one of a few districts that I'm familiar with in this region that adopted a calendar for the school year that placed the statewide in-service day on the 7th.
Yeah.
On the 7th of October, when the statewide in-service day is actually the 14th of October. Although there have been, over time, educators that have participated in training that's been done outside of the school district, universities and such, the statewide in-service, I think, largely is not something that is used by all educators. It is a non-contract day in our calendar, so it's not a contract day for our employees. It became problematic, though, in that we want to make sure we were communicating accurately to the public. Our calendar currently says statewide in-service day is on the 7th when it's on the 14th.
14th, okay.
And we wanted to make sure we weren't messing any student programming up. So we walked into this, and the feedback I've gotten since publishing your agenda here tonight has been, yeah, it makes sense to align with the accurate statewide in-service day, and yet our employee associations are both saying, hey, we've heard from our members who are indicating that they've planned activity around that non-contract day. And if we were to throw that out at this point, we also have families who've planned camping trips around that non-instructional day. So my recommendation has actually shifted. I'm not recommending tonight that you change the calendar. I would recommend that we leave the calendar right where it is, with one revision, so that we're communicating accurately, that our calendar no longer states that it's the statewide in-service day. It simply states that it's a non-contract, non-student day. So that would require, I think arguably, I mean, it could require, if the board wished to take action on this and direct that we remove that language of state in-service day from the actual calendar. It's a clerical error. I'm happy to make that, that modification without board direction too, but I
Can
defer
we
to you.
just treat it as a clerical error? That just seems so much easier.
I'm more than happy to make a motion.
Yes, good.
Do what Tony says.
Okay, go. Go for the
I'll
motion.
second it.
Okay,
Is that clear enough, Missy, for the minutes?
yeah,
Yeah, I think I got it.
great. Okay, you got the motion. You got a second.
Now we gotta
Any-
just vote on it.
Yeah, any other questions? Or, okay, great. All those in favor, raise your right arm. Well, that was unanimous. We're so good.
Thank you.
All right. Next, for the good of the district, anybody have anything to say? Hearing nothing?
Well,
We're moving, what?
I guess, because not everyone may know that a very long-term employee of the district passed away
Oh.
recently, Dennis Edisted. Also, very associated with the ag education program out there for 40 years, 30 some years anyway. Anyway, it's a loss to the community of the program. Just to kind of reference, just in doing his work within the FFA alumni, the local fundraising for those programs, his efforts were directly related to over $1 million of raised funds for that he had his hands directly involved in terms of service to students and maintaining that program out there. So anyway, just a tremendous loss, and I just wanted to point that out. I didn't know if every board member knows.
How many years is Mr. Edelson with us?
And his dad was over 35. I can't remember.
Over 35 years? Why can't we have his name on the land lab with Ralph?
Well, that's
Could
a-
that be a consideration?
That's a whole nother story
We would-
about why I
Okay,
don't really
well,
like the idea of putting
Okay.
names on things, but
All right, well,
not on entire facilities.
yeah, but we can talk about it later. All right, anybody else? Okay. Well, then I'm gonna go ahead and say upcoming meetings, October 13th, we have a regular business meeting at 7 o'clock at the district office. October 27th, work session meeting, 7 o'clock at the district office. November 10th, regular business meeting, 7 o'clock, district office. Okay, who wants to make a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
I would
Second.
like to say something.
Oh, we just have the one public comment, but
Okay.
yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. Okay. So all those in favor to adjourn, raise your right hand. Okay, we're good. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. If you have questions, Dawn, that I can answer, I'd be glad to answer.
Right.
You got- We talked earlier about setting up a meeting time. I'm glad to set up a meeting time.
Oh,